Hello, everybody, and welcome to the inaugural Radio Masters Sales Series webinar, The 3-Minute Difference, Nielsen's New Rule, and You. I'm Radio Inc. online editor Cameron Coates. I'm so happy to be here today, and a big thanks to our sponsors, Marketron, for making this possible. I'd love to just get into it because this is going to take the whole 30 minutes we've got aligned, because it's obviously one of the biggest changes to come to programming. So we're going to get into it. I'd like to first introduce our first panelist, McVay Media President, Mike McVay. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
And we've also got Research Director Inc., Programming Research Consultant, Steve Allan. Steve, great to have you with us as well.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Looking forward to it, because there is, of course, a lot to get into. I mean, this is a monumental change that people have been talking about ever since it was first introduced last year. And now we've kind of seen the first round of results, as it were, with the January book, and that's what we will establish up front. 1 month of data does not establish a pattern, but this is something that a lot of people have their eyes on, and it's how is it going to relate to programming and sales going forward is something that a lot of people have questions about. And by the way, if you have those questions, drop them in the chat. We will get to those in our Q&A towards the end. So let's get into it, because Steve, in our pre-meeting, you called it, it's the wild, wild west out there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think to your point, we have to kind of pump the brakes here a little bit, right? We have 1 month of data. It's all over the place, which I'll touch on in a second. But keep in mind something that I think is very important. When we went from diary to PPM, it took a while to adjust to it. But at the same time, that audience you had on Wednesday was essentially the same audience you had on Thursday. And I think that still sort of applies here. But when you say wild, wild west, we were all under the assumption that in month one, we would see this very steady increase in AQH PUM for every market. And it's all over the place. There's no consistency. Some markets were up 20, 30%. Some markets were up less than that. If you just look at holiday to January, and year over year is the same way. There is just no discernible pattern that I can see right now.
Yeah, and one of the things I'm seeing as we look at all of the different information that's coming out is people are starting to jump to conclusions. Now, to be fair, Nielsen's had this information all along, and so they're just going in and looking at information they have and reconfiguring it and analyzing it differently. That is very different from when PPM first came along. Those of you who've been doing this for a while will remember that right away there were things like PPM doesn't like talk. PPM, we were putting music beds under everything so that it stood out more, so that the meters captured it more. There was a lot of conjecture, a lot of supposition. Um, when PPM came along, it killed smooth jazz. And we saw niche formats like AAA lose a lot of stations. I don't think we're anywhere near that kind of a situation. People shouldn't jump to those conclusions. But Nielsen has had the information already to be able to say, well, we know if we go from 5 individual minutes in a quarter hour to 3, we're going to see changes. But as you look at the numbers come out, it really is all over the place. You can look in Philadelphia and say, well, spoken word did really well in Philadelphia in January. Oh, by the way, the Eagles are in the Super Bowl. You can look at situations like New York, where the huge, big monster radio that serves young people dropped out of the top 5 in some of the sales. Nothing says that that won't be right back next month. And so I think it's going to require 3 months to start to see a trend. But right now it is all over the place. What we are seeing is that AQH is coming up. Average quarter hour is coming up. And we're also seeing QM come up a little bit in some situations and not be touched in others.
So I know, obviously, we want to find ways to turn this opportunity into revenue for the stations. That would be nice, especially everything going on in the world right now. If you saw the BIA numbers come in this morning. But, one of the things that really interested me, and I'd love to talk about, I saw a lot of folks that were doing this due to Cumulus and the Westwood One Audio Active Group, and Pierre Bouffard went over this, is that weekends were a big early winner. Like I said, from the initial data, this could change, but they were a big winner when it comes to the PPM change for audience growth. And, that's, I think, an underloved day part. It's something that typically gets added on as added value. You're like, no one's listening on the weekends, but that's clearly not true. What opportunities do you all see here?
Well, I think to your point on weekends, and we have seen this for years, that when you look at a successful, specifically music station, that they should get roughly 50% of their weekly target QM tuning in during the weekend. If you put that in perspective, that's more people than listen to your morning show, and certainly more people that listen to your night show. And so I think from a programming perspective, weekends have always been overlooked. And I think from sales as well, that's going to continue to be an opportunity. To your point, Cameron, I think it's still early to say, well, wow, the big takeaway is now weekends are more important than they've ever been in the past. What we've learned in the short term is kind of got the results we sort of expected. We got a little bit of QM bump, but is that just seasonal? It's really all in the time spent listening. That's what's jumped up, and that's what's driving the AQH, and that's what we have to pay attention to.
What it does say to me is the importance of recycling from weekend back into weekday as well. We've known for years that those people who are in the car will hit seek and scan on the weekend. They have a little more leisurely time. Their habits change. They're running errands. And so promoting on a weekend to move people back into a day part or make them aware of a contest or promotion you're doing is special. But also everything we see, particularly around sales, says those remote broadcasts promoting that day that there's a special sale somewhere or something that someone's doing, it is a powerful use of radio in something we should be selling to advertisers at least an equal rate to weekday, but I could argue it should be a premium.
Well, and to add to that, I worked for a short time with an ad agency, and their philosophy was for all the retail clients, they bought Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which makes the most sense because that's when most people are going to Home Depot or whatever.
Totally. Absolutely. I will be curious also what experimentation we will see. When you go from needing 5 individual minutes. And for those of you that might be in diary markets and watching this, that's one of the important differences is in a diary market, you need those 5 continuous minutes. In PPM up till now, you've needed 5 individual minutes. Now you need 3 individual minutes. And so the question becomes, do we move our stop sets around?
Yeah.
Is bow tie and hourglass, the quarters at the top and bottom or the sides, is that still appropriate? For years, other researchers, and I know, Steve, you've talked about people say they want shorter commercial breaks, but none of us really did that because of Nielsen's methodology. And so now who's going to be brave enough to take one of their stations in a cluster and stop 4 times an hour with 3 minutes each instead of twice at 6 minutes each? It would be interesting to see if that does anything when you're putting it in the middle of quarter hours.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity for us to rethink everything about how radio stations are structured, because again, going back to the Wild West analogy, it's still very new. Every market that I've looked at is different. I mean, there have been some simple, there's some in those 20s, but I see markets where it pumps up 30%, markets where it's up less. I see where 25-54 does better, 18-34 doesn't. And I think it's incumbent on anybody in the PPM market to really dig in to the numbers this month, just to see what the changes were, not only from the previous survey, but year over year, but track that to see how it changes. I mean, there's so many more questions than answers, right? Is all of a sudden are we going to find out, that 9 o'clock Monday through Friday hour is suddenly incredibly significant, and we didn't know that before, or as we saw about the weekends, how much more important are weekends or things like that, and what demos and what day parts. So there's a lot out there to be explored, and I think it's incumbent on anybody to really look at their market and not pay as much attention to national trends or averages.
So much of it is still speculative too,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
It's like, I think the value of personality has been important for a long time, more so of late, because you need to stand out. You need a reason to be there. But I think that we'll find that the importance of personalities telling me a little bit about a lot of things will be good. Those shorter bites of content, even if it's more frequent, could be good. I also think that teasing, getting me to come back over and over again, because we know that's how you build time spent listening, can be very beneficial as well. But we are still seeing for the first time, the first month, how it's all going to settle out. And it's tough. It's really impossible to look at a holiday to January. And if you look at December to January, you still have parts of those all Christmas stations in December. And I think we're going to know more next month and the month after. One of the other things, and I doubt that this will happen, although Nielsen has the information, they could do this. I wish, this is a me thing, editorial comment, I wish that Nielsen would go back and run all of 2024 so that when we compare January 2025, we're comparing it apples to apples with a January 24 that's been refigured. Would be a lot of work. I don't expect it's going to happen. But the reality of it is, it would give us a better view. When Voltaire came along and we saw stations pop up, you didn't really know that first year if it was Voltaire, if it was new meters going out there. And in January, we always know there's a reset. There's new meters that come in and out in January. So there's a lot of things still that are unknowns for us to factor into this.
Well, keep in mind too, when you look month to month in any PPM situation, and especially with now the 3-minute rule in there, there's so many factors at play, right? We know, for example, that the installed panel on average churns 8 to 10% a month in most markets. So to your point, Mike, is my gain January to January or holiday to January because we rolled in a new household, I rolled out a household, or something like that? Is it seasonal changes? So it's still kind of early, and there's so many factors at play. You're going to look at your CPR report, for example, and you're going to say you have a 35-year-old male who all of a sudden went up in X number of quarter hours. Is that because of the 3-minute rule, or did they start listening to you more? There's just so many unknowns there that we can't assume everything is because we've now added in. Now, do I think that the 3-minute rule is a great idea? Absolutely. It's great for radio. It makes radio seem more important. But keep in mind, we're not creating new listeners here, right? We're just doing a better job of measuring the people that were already there. It's not like you can look at Cume across the country, and the Cumes are up, a point or two. So that means, okay, maybe we pick up some light 3-minute listeners. But for the most part, we're just now doing a better job, or Nielsen, I should say, is doing a better job of measuring the radio listening that exists.
And we're seeing that rating go from 0.2 to a 0.3. We know that if you took those numerals out a couple columns, that little skosh sometime where you spill over that 0.005 takes it up. That's happening. We're seeing that for sure. But so address this for me. There's a part of me that believes, and sidebar, I should say, I'm thrilled Nielsen's doing this because
Absolutely.
It's mirroring what other medium does. But so if I'm a national advertising agency and I'm negotiating with radio, it should be expected I'm going to say, that's fuzzy math.
No.
I shouldn't pay more. And the reality is, as you said when we were talking in advance, they've been getting more audience than they thought they were. They've been paying less than they should for the audience they have.
Well, think about it this way. They're buying 100 points, right? And we're going to find out now that with the new rule, that 100 points was really 120 points, roughly, whatever the increase is. So on the one hand, they might be tempted to go, well, gee, I can cut back. No, you can't cut back because then you'll be getting less than what you were getting before. So the reality is this radio has been giving you this term value added for a very long time. And so if you want to maintain, assuming your campaigns are successful, if you want to maintain that level of success, then you need to keep spending and reaching as much as you have been in the past. Now, perhaps, maybe this is pie in the sky, perhaps radio's opportunity is to say, that's the value added we've given you. Maybe we can stop adding all these sponsorships and little things on the air that have cluttered up the airway. I know that's not going to happen, but maybe we can sell those to new people. Maybe it's a revenue opportunity on that end.
I like it. And I do want to say, if you have any questions, make sure to put those in the comments, and we will get to those here in just a few minutes. We'll tackle them all at once. But Mike, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say what Steve just brought up, and it's not something the three of us have talked about, but it raises the question, does the value of short duration units, SDUs, come up? For a while, that was a thing. Those little commercials that go with traffic or that go with weather or are shorter breaks. Any thoughts on that, Steve, from what you've seen in research over the years? I mean, is there, in addition to looking at how we do the clocks, is there a difference in how we should be delivering our messages?
I can't say that from a Nielsen perspective that matters. And let's face it, so much radio is, 8-minute stop sets that it's really hard to separate that out. I go back to what you said earlier, Mike. Let's get to this data. Let's get a couple months in, and maybe it is time to rethink whether we need to be as long and as involved in 8-minute stop sets with 20 units in it. Is that really the right way to go moving forward? Is there an advantage to us of breaking that up a little bit more and getting people to listen longer? With that 3-minute, they come in, they go. So maybe it's a chance to get them back quicker if they are tuning out.
I think there's a lot of different things that we'll have to look at from the programming side. The stop sets, as we mentioned, the length of breaks, teasing, and giving the listeners an incentive to listen. Because again, repeat listening is what builds time spent listening. But also perhaps music turnover. How often are we turning over our biggest hit songs? Is there some repetition that's magnified there? Or should those big songs be turned over more often? And I would say that it's important not to knee-jerk and jump to a conclusion without having more months of information before forming a final opinion. But I would encourage people to really tear it apart. And I sit and say, if I were still in a corporate role somewhere and had 5 stations in a cluster, I would probably look at one of my lower rated stations in that cluster and do some experimenting to see what we get back from it. Because there will be advantages to the 3 minutes that are undiscovered as of this moment.
Yeah, I think a couple quickly on the music thing. I think you raise a good point. If you're currently spinning whatever your hottest category at whatever rotation, and you were assuming it was reaching what percentage of your queue, your reach frequency for your listeners was, it's actually been higher. You've actually been reaching them more with that. But also keep in mind too, and Nielsen was, I thought one of the telling things from the Nielsen presentation last fall, when they showed that if you look at every single minute in the hour, the tune in for those minutes is equal. So there's not a particular point in the hour necessarily where more people come in than others, which if you also think about life, that makes sense, right? People don't live from 0 to 15 and 15 to 30. That's not how the real world works. So, if we're going to look at how clocks are structured and things like that, I thought the best Nielsen example was, in the old days, if you listen to a station from 13 to 30, 12 to 33, you get credit for 1/4 hour. Now you're getting 3. So, you can stretch people out over that time a little bit more efficiently, perhaps.
That is interesting about the quarter hours, because in dire markets, we always see it being the first and third quarter hour. In dire markets, you see Thursday and Monday being important days. And so, how that shifts and how that plays out will be interesting. But again, Nielsen's already had this information.
Right.
They know what those habits are.
Exactly.
So I want to make sure we have a little time to get to the Q&A, but I did want to touch on one thing. Obviously, sales managers, program directors should be having conversations about this. What are the key questions that you all think that they should be having amongst themselves on both sides, especially with this initial round of data?
Do you want me to jump in first, or you?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So to me, the things you want to ask yourself first off are the stop sets. Are the stop sets in the right location? Does there need to be more thought on how we structure our commercial breaks? I know this is crazy granular, but when you're down to a minute, that's very granular. And if there's only 3 of those, do the commercials that sound most like music or the longest need to go first in a break? Is there some variation there? Where do you put your live reads? Is there some change that should be made there? And so I think that's important. Mention was weekends. It's a shame that that's been lost on us, because for years it was morning drive, midday Saturday, midday Sunday. And as time has changed, as more medium has come in that competes with radio, things have changed. But also the buying of Monday through Friday, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. makes people forget about nights and forget about weekends. I can drive across America and hear very important day parts at night or on the weekend have no talent, be segueing music, and just playing commercial breaks. And that's lost opportunities to bring people into your radio station, to make people know that you're a really good radio station, known for whatever it is you want to be known for. And that brings people back to your station. So I think what we're seeing with the weekends and that importance should be addressed. I also think that personalities and what they do should be a little shorter, but every bit as powerful as they have been in the past. Those are things that I think are key from my perspective.
To the point of programming and sales, first off, programming and sales should always be talking. Management should always be talking, because it is a symbiotic relationship, and you can't program without revenue, and you can't get revenue without programming. That said, I think the opportunity here right now might be for program directors who are more steeped in the depth of the numbers than, let's say, the sales managers might be, to bring defense to the front. So the sales manager that's beleaguered by the agencies who are saying, oh no, it's not real anymore, or we have to cut back because we're reaching more than we thought we were. This is where program directors can really come to the front with real hard facts to show the value of radio and why advertisers need to continue to spend as much, if not more, with us.
So we'll jump to the questions with that. Barb Throm asked about the variances that we've seen here in this first month and how they harken back to the sample size. And I think, Steve, you touched a little bit on that with the CUME. That has kind of largely stayed the same. It's just we're seeing more AQH.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about samples, sample size is a different conversation, right? Do we need more sample size in PPM markets? Absolutely, we do. Will Nielsen give it to us? Sure. Will radio pay for it? No. So let's just end that argument right there. I think there's always volatility book to book. And it's too early to really say that, yes, the 3-minute rule caused this here. We do see increased AQH year to year in a lot of markets. And I got to believe that has to be because of the new rule, because you're seeing TSL. I mean, I've seen some markets already where, for example, 2554 TSL was up an hour, year over year. That's pretty significant.
Yeah, I think.
I'm talking market level listening.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And you're absolutely right on the sample size of it. I think that where it can impact us is back to the rating. Somebody going from a 0.1 to a 0.2, it will roll up. I know that there are radio companies, groups, stations that really get that granular to where they see how many digits out the AQH rating goes and how close they are to being rounded up. Because once you hit that, if you're 0.15, then you're able to round up. And so, that just little skosh more. And so we should see that. The question for me remains, will sales take advantage of that? Will they be prepared to overcome the arguments from the more sophisticated ad buyers who say it's fuzzy math? That's what remains for me.
And we got another question from Grace Augustino asking about Hispanic stations. Have you all looked into those? What have you seen on that end if you've been digging in?
We've done some preliminary looking at different formats across all the PPM markets. It's a little early for me to dive into it, but from some of the preliminary looks, I've looked at 18 to 49 and 2554. Spanish stations are getting benefit in line with everybody else. Again, that's a very 30,000 foot 1 month rule view. So your mileage may vary.
And then Jason asks, could the spot length conversion have value for the new rule?
And does that mean 30 seconds versus 60, I wonder?
I would assume so. I would say, Jason, if you want to pop in and clarify it, let me know. But
yeah. I would think it's still, people count the number of units, not minutes, right. And so a 15 and 2/30s is 1 minute 15 seconds, but listeners have heard 3 commercials that are very equal to them, and so in the land of Oz, if you're running a 12-minute hour, you'd have 12 60s, but that's just not how we sell today.
Jason clarified it's 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Again, a 15 counts as a commercial, a unit in listeners' heads, but he's probably referencing my question of the SDUs. I think there's value, additional sales opportunity, not necessarily buoying an audience, but doing a 5 or 10 second SDU next to a feature in my brain is better than running a long commercial next to a feature.
I think we've got time for just about one more. We've got Chris Crane asking, any early implications for spoken word formats?
Again, it's too early to tell. If you look at, we do that ratings roundup, which is the extension of what we used to do with All Access every month. And we look at 6+, 25, 54, 18, 34, 18 to 49. Overall, the demos that have done the best have been more 25, 54, and 18 to 49 than 18 to 34. I do think that there is a benefit for spoken word because of the 12 to 33 example we said previously, because people tend to listen for longer times and they may cross over those stop sets. But right now, I think it's too early to say, CHR benefited, News Talk didn't. It's again, every market's going to be different. I would look at your market and see how it did in this first month in those formats.
And to your point, I think that, the first day the numbers rolled out, I was jumping to conclusions. The second day they rolled out, they invalidated the conclusions I made on day one. And so we really do need to see more of it. My initial reaction when I saw Philadelphia was sports, huge. but then remembered the Super Bowl was in there, and it was the Philadelphia Eagles. And so I think that we will see those things that have done well in times of crisis will do even better. Those things that have done well when sports is an event will do even better. I have a supposition that I believe contesting will do better. Big contest will perform better, but it's all about, getting that person to stick around longer.
Well, and let me just circle back to this whole, again, our Wild West thing. I'm just looking at market pump on a 6+ basis. Let me just give you two examples. January 24 to January 25. Phoenix was up 36.1%. Pretty good. Atlanta was down 1.7. What does that mean? At this point, we don't know.
Which just means we'll all have to meet back here again real soon, or at least later in the series. Thank you so much, Steve, Mike. This has been, it's a lot of ground to cover in 30 minutes. So I appreciate what you both do. And of course, both Radio Inc. columnists can find your wisdom each week. Steve, you on every other Monday, and Mike, you every single Tuesday. And Mike, does it say anything that you'd like to say as closing thoughts?
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I'm sorry that we're not able to say here are 5 things you should do, but I think we have been able to say here are the things you should be considering as you tear apart the ratings in relationship to your own station. Don't just let it flow over you. Analyze it, look at it, and take some chances. Experiment a little bit, because that's the only way we're going to figure out where the landmines are and what works the best.
And Steve, of course, Research Director Inc., you all have your Hot Topics blog. I'll throw this up here in case anyone wants to check that out. But what are your closing thoughts?
I'm going to echo what Mike said. Dig deep into the numbers, and hopefully in 3 months we'll be back with 5 things that you should know.
Looking forward to that. And as I say, well, the next sales series webinar, excited to say, is going to be about AI prompting. So that'll be very exciting. We'll all learn how to dig into ChatGPT and all those a little bit more. But Mike, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Big thank you to our sponsor, Marketron, for bringing this together for the inaugural Radio Masters Sales Series webinar. Of course, follow our daily headlines for more, and check out our brand new print edition, which just came out on Monday. Fantastic. And gentlemen, I'm just looking forward to seeing where this all goes with Nielsen and the 3-minute rule.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you.